Today we will look at the marketing functions, and within marketing functions we will look at the channels of distribution. We are seeing from the beginning various functions of management, principles of management, and from planning to control and to leadership. And we also looked at the international dimension of management. So the channels of distribution, if you see, it is one of the critical things, and every organization has to understand its business model, the nature of its products, nature of its consumers or the customers, and then link the organizational products to the consumers and customer expectations and provide meaningful experiences. In this direction, what you need to learn are the following. End of this session, you must have learnt and understood concept and definition of channels of distribution, different distribution channels and where and how one should use these channels, consideration to channel planning, or what is that we need to think in selecting an appropriate channel depending on the organizational model and the practices, and also how to select given the several choices, several alternatives. When you see channel of distribution, what is that we are trying to talk about? It is the combination of institutions, the combination of various practices through which a seller markets products to the user or ultimate consumer. So the key words are this, right? There is a seller, there is an effort of marketing of the products and to the end user or the ultimate consumer. That's what it is, a simple statement. But as we go into the details, we will see what are the concerns and what are the issues before any organization. See, when we talk about the channel of distribution of products, the essential links that connect the producers and the customers. So there is a producer and the customer and the link. These are the three things we need to look at. So when we see this, how do we classify this? The simplest and the first kind of a choice is the direct channel. Direct channel is some manufacturers use, they know their customers, so they carry their goods and then they go and distribute it directly. You could have seen many of the people who are in the handicrafts kind of a business. What do? They manufacture. They don't manufacture too many things, but they call it as made to order. So they know the consumer and then they know the customer and then they directly deal with them. So there are no middlemen. In a direct channel, there are no mid institutions or middlemen, but it is the directly connected between the customer and the manufacturer. When we are talking about indirect channels, channels with one or more intermediates are referred to as indirect channels. So that means we are talking about some wholesaler, some reseller, or some distributor. So we talk at different levels. So that means we are talking about that there is a channel consisting of several intermediaries in the marketing situation. So the consumer market is basically through the wholesalers to the retailers and the retailers to the customers. Take for example in the garment sector. In the garment sector there is a wholesaler. The wholesaler collects all the things from the different producers or from one producer and then hands it over to the different retailers. So the retailers pick depending on their requirements, or he may also have a sub dealers. So the wholesaler for a whole India as a region, and then each state have a statewide distributors, and then a district-wide distributors, and then to the retailer, and then retailer to the customer. So that means in the channel we have several institution, several participants, could be the wholesalers, sub-dealers, dealers and things like that. So, when we are talking about channels with one or more intermediaries, we are referring to as the indirect channels, and then common channel in the consumer market is basically from wholesaler to the retailers to the customers. So, that means we are talking about a marketing intermediaries in a kind of a chain of activities. So, we have suppliers, or we have the suppliers plants. From supplier plants we are moving to the manufacturers. From manufacturers we are talking about wholesalers, wholesalers to the retailers, and retailers to the consumers. And today we are referring this to the supply chain, and in the supply chain we are talking about from manufacturer to the consumer as the channel of distribution. That is, from the factory it has to move, the goods will move to the wholesalers, and the wholesalers will keep it, and then they may be one wholesaler or several of the wholesalers depending upon how the company would perceive it as, and then they distribute it to the retailers, and then retailing also is supported by the wholesalers through advertisement, through medias, through support for advertising and publicity, where the consumers go to the retailers and buy whatever the products or services. As we can see, there could be many examples of the basic channels of distribution, but if you look at the consumer market, so you have given an example of AOL, then you have Nissan, then I have the Dell, then also the Procter and Gamble. And the Procter and Gamble becomes what we people talk about the FMCG kind of a product, that is fast moving consumer goods product, and then you also see the other varieties. So, one, you have a direct to the consumer, the customer. The other side is you do have a retailer and then to the customer. Then in the third example you have the wholesaler, retailer and the customer, but you can also have a wholesaler, then another wholesaler, that is at the, so nationwide, then you have the statewide, maybe district wise, and then the retailer, and then finally to the consumer. So, the various choices could be there depending upon how many intermediaries are required. As you can see, the nature of product becomes very critical in this whole game. The various goods and products can be broadly classified into the categories of industrial goods and the consumer goods. Say for example, the Ace designers in Bangalore, they manufacture CNC machines. HMT manufactures tractors. So, when you see this, there is a possibility to imagine that they can directly go to the customers and then hand it over. But who are these customers? The customers could be A, the end customer is user by himself, or the customer could be in another industry who uses this machine, manufactures something else. But the broadly what we classify in this is there is an industrial versus the consumer goods. Industrial goods requires a different kind of channel and the support, and the consumer goods requires a different effort at the wholesaler or at the retailer's level. So, each of these categories further encompasses into the varieties of goods, right. We can talk about the low cost equipment, it could be the furniture, it could be the food items, it is the groceries, it is clothing. So, that means there are items which are perishable in nature and there are items which are non-perishable in nature. So, that means you can hold, you can keep it, there is shelf life where it is possible to store and keep it for a longer period of time. Another effort could be to distribute as quickly as possible. Look at for example milk. So, the milk is that it has a clear shelf life within which the whole distribution has to take place. So, that means from the dairies it has to be collected and then the dairy as a kind of a wholesaler has to distribute it to the various retailers, and the retailers may have the next level of retailers who will pick again their own quota and then distribute it to the consumers at different residential houses. So that means depending on the products, the channels need to be adjusted, and then we need to work out an effective organization for delivery and satisfaction. So it is very clearly, it is dependent upon the nature of products and the kind of services. This is a table which gives the details of how you can look at the industrial goods and also the channels for consumer goods. So there is, as I given the explanation earlier, so there is industrial goods can go through directly from manufacturer to the end industrial user, or it could be from manufacturer to the wholesaler to the end user, or manufacturer directly to the consumers, or manufacturers to the retailer and to the consumer. So that means the 4 possibilities for every organization within the industrial goods. Similarly, when you see the consumer goods, the similar choices will be there. The manufacturer can produce through his wholesalers, wholesalers send it to the retailers and then to the consumers. Or you have, think about like this, farmer. So farmers, it goes to the kind of a wholesale trading markets, and then it gets through the wholesale or what we call as these mandi markets. From there it gets into the retailers, and then from retailers to the consumers. Similarly, you in service organization, then you go through some agents, or through some brokers, or through who can support the organization in terms of identifying the customer requirements, and then it is delivered to the consumers. We will also see in non-profit organization. In a non-profit organization, you will find it is distributed through different exhibitors or different subgroups which will talk about the services of the organization, and then at the end you have the consumers. So what we are trying to see is very clearly the different channels and combination exist, but basically we are looking at providing services from marketing point of view. Either organizations can take responsibility to deal with their consumers, customers directly, or through create 2 or 3 layers of institutions which will deliver the goods manufactured at the site to the respective consumers. The question always comes, how widely these customers are distributed, where are the locations, and also how long you can hold this product. That means the speed with which it has to move from manufacturing plant to the end customer or the end consumer. So that is where we are going to talk about really what are the important considerations. Considerations in channel planning, the key issue is what are the customer characteristics, both in terms of the number as well as the geographical distribution. Very interestingly, we will find in industrial goods, the numbers are limited. The number of consumers you can always list, and it is known, and you can also estimate what is that their specific requirements are. But geographically they may be distributed. If you look at a machine manufacturing company, their customers could be all over India, possible, or maybe different parts of the globe. So the numbers are important. Numbers obviously is going to be much more limited, and you always have a complete picture of their characteristics. Whereas when it comes to the consumer goods, the number is much more, and the geographical dispersion also can be estimated, or the geographical demands can be estimated. So the consideration is to know the number of customers and also to know how they are distributed. Similarly, we also have to look at the product characteristics. The product characteristics, when you start seeing, the most critical one is the perishability. Perishability is what we are talking about, is how long you can keep it and what is the minimum time required so that it can be moved from one manufacturing site to the end one. Look at this, any milk product what I mentioned to you earlier. It could be the vegetables on the other side or fruits. So when you look at some of these things, it is always within the period of anywhere between 24 hours to a week's time. It has to be moved from one end to the other. Otherwise, then you will see that quality of your end product are not going to be the same. So the freshness and the quality may not be liked if it takes more time. As you are seeing, there will be a lot of wastage in the process. That means it affects the business performance itself. And also the second important variable apart from the perishability is the bulkiness, how big it is. If you look at some of the industrial products are big. So that means recently I visited one of the machinery manufacturers who makes a honing machine, and they make one machine maybe per month or maximum 2 machines per month. So that means when they make it, it takes enormous time to move out of the factory, and then it takes some time to move it to the customer site. That is basically we are talking about the industrial machinery, industrial products, and then it takes some time to make sure that it is working at the customer place. Generally in these things you don't have the intermediaries, but it is the organization deals with the customer directly, and the customer also would like to deal with the organization directly without any middleman. So that is where the next important issue will come, is about the installation and the maintenance service required. In consumer goods, there is no issues of any maintenance, or particularly in the food items. So it is sold and then the product need to be consumed. So there is no intermediary or intermediary things. Whereas let's take that somebody is selling air conditioners, TVs. So immediately a customer who buys a TV or an air conditioner also would ask a question, do you have somebody who would come and install this in my house? So that means you require a support personnel, and the support person has to go open the product, put it in the consumer's place, and then so the most of the household items do require that kind of an end support, where the customers only know how to use it and may not have that kind of a knowledge how to install this. So that initial installation, making sure that the items are working in the customer's place, require product support. And also sometimes the product requires maintenance at different periods. Take for example the cars. The cars do require regular maintenance depending on the use and depending on the wear and tear of the product. So that means you need to have the retailers, and the retailers also are supported with service centers. Service centers, maintenance centers become very critical in working out the channel and the channel partners. And also the unit value. So the high value items always need to be handled carefully, and carefully in the sense that the more you have the intermediaries, you are likely to lose substantially. So the question is whether you want to have the intermediaries or not. So the high value items, normally it is traded through a broker or sometimes directly to the end customer. And similarly, we also have to look at the intermediary characteristics. Who are these intermediaries and what do they do really? So when you see that, there are basically looking at intermediary characteristics as availability, means how many people are available and how many are able to handle some of these things. We also talk about their willingness to accept product or the product line. So that means they have to identify with the product, they must have the product knowledge, and then we must also know some of their strengths and weaknesses. So these intermediary characteristics are very critical because they represent the organization, they represent the product, they represent the complete the strengths and weaknesses of the product itself. So that means their strengths comes with respect to the way they identify with the products and services of the company. And also you must know some of their weaknesses. Some are hard sellers, some are they sell based on their credits. So what is that they are trying to do in terms of their strengths and weaknesses, one need to understand. And similarly, we also need to see the competitive characteristics. Competitive characteristics are, what are the geographic proximity? So is it too many people are we putting in the same place as our suppliers or the retailers and the wholesalers, or we are also have to see the proximity in terms of the outlet. So if you create too many outlets in a close proximity, then we are running into issues of competition amongst our own sellers of our products. I think that may not be desirable at all. But in some products, it may be desirable that your own people are there distributed at different points. So depending upon the products, depending upon the product characteristics, depending upon the kind of intermediaries available and the nature of the organization, we have to work these details. And unless we put our thoughts into all this, and that is where our own strengths becomes, that means the company organizational strength becomes much more important. One of the key things is the financial strength of the company. Financial strength of the company is to give credit to your intermediaries. In some, it is possible to give credit period of 3 months. In some situations, you expect the customers to pay full money and then wait for their products. So depending upon the demand and the supply and the kind of a competitive positioning of the product itself, one has to use this kind of a choice of how much you can sustain your presence in the market through giving credits or not giving credits at all. I think this is an important choice what the company has to, or the organization has to explore with. In many consumer goods, perishable goods, if you see, some consumer goods can run very effectively through a good credit based systems. That means your retailer would sell and then pay it back to you with a period of 45 days to 3 months. So that means the retailer's credit worthiness becomes very critical. So your understanding of your credit, the retailers in terms of what is that they can hold on and how reliable they are and what is the kind of a relationship you need to have with your retailers, all this becomes very critical. I think that is where the wholesaler roles will come into picture. If your organization not able to understand your retailers, better you leave these choices to the wholesaler, because the wholesaler will maintain the required relationship with his retailers, and then he absorbs certain risk what the company would take otherwise if you are dealing directly with your retailers. The other important thing is the product mix. So that means what is the kind of variety you are able to provide. If as an organization I have only one product, I have only one line of choice, then to that extent that I can standardize my procedures and practices. But if I have different variants, different products, that means I have to see whether all the products should be handed over to the same retailer or same wholesaler, or I distribute it. That means a company which is in different regions and also getting into different products. Let me take for example housing. So in the housing complexes or in the housing business, as a wholesaler you may be building standardized flats for the medium medium income groups. You can also be building high income groups, high end kind of a flats and independent houses. And that's the time where you really have to see if you want to going to have your channel partners or you want to have your retailers to do this. That means you have to see what is their past experience and whether you should have different channel partners, one towards high end homes, high end independent bungalows to a mid level flats. So these are the kind of choices depending upon the company characteristics one need to understand. And also look at the present company marketing policies. What are the organizational marketing policies? Do you push or do you create a kind of a pull opportunities? So that means, do you use all the opportunities to force the selling situations, or you allow people to ask for, demand for? So how is the competitive positioning, what I told you about the product, as well as the perception about the company itself matters substantially. If your products are in high demand or you are going to have a limited supply, then organization would think 100 times to have any partners or have any intermediaries. But if you think that you don't have the expertise and you don't understand the end customer, but you have a great expertise in production and in manufacturing or in implementing, then you would like to have more partners, more intermediaries to reach out to the customers. I think that's where the company characteristics, company strengths becomes one of the important characteristics or a consideration in deciding the channel planning. Then we also have to see some of the environmental characteristics. Environmental characteristics in terms of the economic conditions. Economic conditions may be always supporting in terms of inflationary conditions. When you see in an inflationary economy, what is that your intermediaries would do? So they would buy at a price from you, but they would like to hold it and then sell it at a different point of time, because they can book their profits around the high inflation rates prevailing in that kind of a situation. Whereas in a low inflation situation, and when they know that demands are fluctuating, then they may not hold anything at all, but all the time they would be making the customer to wait. So they would collect the money and then wait for the products to move to their places, and then create its own kind of a bottlenecks to service the end customers. And similarly, the legal regulations and the restrictions. The legal regulations and restrictions makes to see what are the margins available, and then what kind of contract you can have, what kind of contract you can enforce. I think these things again become very, very important. But when lot of small traders are involved, look at for example cigarettes, look at for example many of these high-end consumer items which are of extremely small value. That means very few things you can really enforce, and that becomes a more of a cash transaction. So the organizations would like to have a little legal things, enforceable things at this point of time. But still you need to maintain several records, and then you need to ensure that all the legal compliances under different acts are followed, particularly VAT related things. So it becomes one to see how to ensure this kind of a compliance and identify those channel partners who are fit to maintain these records and meet the overall expectations as well. And there are some general considerations. Basically to see the task of selecting and designing a channel of distribution at first appears to be very, very overwhelming kind of a task or too complicated. But this is a critical task to be performed by every organization. And particularly the constraint could be that there is no traditional channel exists. That means there are various middlemen are available. Then how do you see? In certain areas there are people and there are established groups of people, and then you only will go through that. But in many situations you don't know who could be the best wholesalers. Many of the new technology products are running into these issues. Who should be our channel partners? How they should be identified? So some of them even go through that mode of franchisees. So that is where the kind of consideration what it could be. As I mentioned to you earlier, what is the distribution coverage required? And that means you must see what is that area one can comfortably deal with, where people have to be identified, the goods have to be moved, and then the goods have to be made available on a regular basis. Take for example the newspaper. So the newspaper coverage, if you see, it has to be distributed to every nook and corner. So that means you need to have a retailer who should be able to distribute within the number of hours available. That means assuming that the newspapers are ready in the midnight, say by 12 o'clock, or maybe around 1 o'clock early in the morning. So that means from then onwards, morning about 5:30, it should be distributed to all the end consumers. So that means one need to see how it should be collected, how it should be pushed, how it should be distributed. Another important thing is the degree of control desired. The degree of control in terms of the end customer gets exactly whatever is there in your mind. So that means he gets the correct information, he gets the right product, that your distributor does not move one product against the other. So that means you need to see what is that you have to control the end group, or you would like to leave it to the distributor, so that you can assume that by training or by any other mechanism he will deliver. Similarly, what is the total distribution cost? So the cost of distribution cannot be more than the cost of production itself. So that means you need to see how it should be sent, sometimes through sea, sometimes through by air, sometimes it is through by road. So one need to work out exactly how it should be sent. So you have the distribution cost, and similarly, do you have any channel flexibility? Do you have different modes, different methods of distribution? So unless this is specific considerations are well understood, when you see this distribution coverage required, we are talking about very continuum of ranging from very intensive to selective to exclusive kind of a distribution. In intensive distribution, the manufacturer attempts to gain exposure through as many wholesalers and retailers as possible. So that means you work through very specifically with all your channel partners. Whereas in selective distribution, the manufacturer limits the use of intermediaries to the ones believed to be the best available. So that means you will not go through everybody, you will select very carefully, and then typically what is called as the franchisee kind of a thing. Similarly, in exclusive distribution, the manufacturer severely limits the distribution things. So that means they represent the color of the organization, the schema of the organization, and how it should be delivered. Take for example Coffee Day. Now when you look at this Coffee Day kind of an experience, that means it is a very exclusive kind of a very standardized kind of a distribution channel, and that's the time where they are given set of rights to do business within that kind of a particular territory. So that means you define the area, the scope of work, and also try to standardize many of the mechanisms whatever you would use, which according to you would benefit the quality of service or the quality of delivery of the products. And when we see the degree of control desired, the seller must make these decisions of, as I said earlier, how much to have this, and also the policy surrounding the product as possible. For example, some products must be sold only to certain age groups, and you also know some products are preferred by certain age group of people. So if you know the profile of the customers, and also similarly the use of this, take for example the pharmaceuticals and drugs kind of a thing. So that means you have to have a control at the end, and so you have to use some kind of a regulatory things. So that means they have to identify the doctor, they have to identify the patient's name and why this, and also write down the batch name and many things which the retailer have to do before issuing the bill. So that means the capturing of the required information is very important and it is very critical. So that means the control one organization need to have has to be supported through all these practices of providing the batch number, providing the details of date of manufacturing, etc. And when you are talking about this, whenever you use many of the indirect channels, really the manufacturer has no control. So that means you surrender the control, but you make a wishful thinking that some of these practices will be done. And then whenever you see the selection of this, generally assume that the total system should be designed to minimize the cost. So the cost is an important consideration, and when you see the cost consideration, it is the distribution cost, and the distribution cost includes the transportation cost, order processing cost, inventory carrying cost, packaging cost. So that means each of these things must be understood, so otherwise your pricing will go haywire and your margins will come down drastically. At the end of the day, you may not make any profits at all unless you work through very systematically. Similarly, the channel flexibility. The consideration is if there are changing conditions coming because of the customer expectations, you must know how to meet some of those things. But if you make a contract with few of the intermediaries and the intermediaries are not able to support, then you get into a bind. That bind means neither you are able to go through a new channel partners, or you may not be able to close the contract with the existing wholesalers or the other dealers. So it is extremely important to see how to keep this kind of a flexibility. So the organizations try to work through giving targets, through giving incentives, also providing some disincentives. They try and keep their flexibility. So most of the times, if you see, sometimes the population has moved from inner cities to the suburbs. So that means they may change their priorities. They may start making their shopping in various centers and the malls. So that means you have given set of rights to some people, but it is no longer it will be useful or effective. So that means you need to think in terms of your channel partners in the malls, as we are seeing new shopping centers. So you must establish a different order or a different kind of presence. So you must see how to, and that is where the organizations need to keep these intermediaries and the wholesalers and the retailers and that kind of an organization intact. If you see, last important point is that kind of an intermediaries, how much, what is that they are. Are intermediaries bad? If you ask this kind of a question, half the cost of the things they buy are marketing costs, and that go largely to pay for the work of the intermediaries. So the question is, always organizations think about getting rid of the intermediaries and pass the savings on to the consumer. So you have seen where people would be announcing that at the wholesale prices. At the wholesale prices, you are talking about that, look, I am passing on some of the benefits which I would otherwise pay for the retailers or some of the intermediaries. As you see, the intermediaries perform several functions. They perform transportation, they perform the storage functions, they also sell, they sell including in terms of merchandising, personal selling, and sometimes doing the advertising. So the intermediaries are important. The choice is that the organization can do all of this, some of this, or none of this. And then, so you can, you can only eliminate the intermediaries, isn't it? So what you are talking about, but the activities you cannot. I think this is the first statement or the first principle. And intermediaries have survived in the past because they have performed this much more efficiently, much more effectively than what others can do or what you can do. So that is where that their presence and their activities are must. And similarly, the costs are no doubt are involved. They do come with the kind of the money which you have to pay, whether you would have got it as a profit otherwise, but they also bring value to the table. They bring the value to the table, that means they create much more value than what they spend or what you would pay for them. So that means they add to the speed, they add to the image, they add to the quality of service, they add in the overall sense, they represent you in different places, otherwise you had no view of the market situation or what the markets can do for you. So that is where the people are talking about these different kinds of utilities. I am only trying to show through some pictures. So there is a kind of a form utility in terms of the color, feel, smell kind of a thing, and there are things which are called as the time utility, within which it has to be used, and comes with specific shelf life. Then there are place utility. So very clearly where this is made available, very close to the workplaces, or it is in the railway station, or it is in the airport. So there are place utility, and then your person has to be there to serve and meet the customer expectations. Or sometimes it is the possession utility, that is particularly when they want to have it, it should be made available, and so it becomes the speed with which they should have. It is the facilities, what facilitates the transfer of ownership. We have talked about that TV or any of the technology linked products. So it always comes with the credits, it is the delivery, it is the installation, and also the quickness with which it can be put to use at the customer place. And also in terms of the information utility. So today we are talking about making available through the web, making available through in many other mechanisms, but then they show the pictures, they explain what it contains, they also provide the variety, and the user can, depending on the requirement, can respond to these situations. The other important thing is the service utility. The service utility, if you see that it is the brand, able to represent the brand, able to represent that quality of service with which always the brand comes, and creating that kind of a brand equity in the market situations. There are people with full service wholesalers. The full service wholesalers, what do? They carry inventories with the associated risks. So that means whether it is perishable or otherwise, the product may have demand or otherwise, they buy at a risk. They also provide delivery. They also perform the sales functions. They also extend credit to the customers at their own risk. So that means the full service wholesalers are one kind where they transfer the company risk to themselves and then act as a kind of a buffer and represent the company to all the intermediaries and the end customers. Similarly, you have the limited function wholesalers. The limited function wholesalers are called as the rack jobbers. So that means they will do the limited, they keep your products and sell as and when it is demanded, and the cash and carry kind of a wholesalers that they collect it, but then they don't deal with any of the credits, and also it is called as the drop shippers. That means as and when it is required, they send it to the end consumers. So you will find the types of retailers which you would have seen many in the whatever you come through. There are departmental stores like this Food World and Fab Mall and kind of a thing. Then you also have the discounted departmental stores like this, the big bazaars. Then you do have many of the earlier kind of a thing. Then there are people part of this wholesalers club like this Metro, where they collect at the wholesale level and also sell at the wholesale level like a cash and carry. And then you also have the category of the killer store, the home store, the IKEA kind, where the IKEA is basically wholesale furniture manufacturing, but also sells directly to the customers. Then you also have the convenience stores, or what we call as the local stores. Then you have the specialty stores like jewelries, then the shoes and bicycles. So these are specialized kind of retailers. Then you have the outlet stores called this, now you think of the Nike, the Reebok and things like that. Then you also have some of the supermarkets of like Shoppers Stop. So when you are talking about these varieties of situations, varieties of retailers possible, so we are talking about the selective distribution. Selective distribution, and so you must see where you would like to be present. Sometimes you want to be in a high-end market, sometimes you want to be at the middle end, or sometimes you want to be as friendly as a kind of a neighborhood things possible. And similarly, the considerations what we talked about earlier, the moderate coverage, some channel control established, better distribution image, moderate number of customers, service, relationship, all these things becomes very critical in terms of this, depending on this kind of what we want to do. And when we look at the intensive distribution, we are talking about this wide coverage, many customers, many intermediaries, very little channel control, and then the communication is at the pull. People ask for what is it they want, and then and similarly we also talked about the exclusive distribution. Exclusiveness means it comes with high price, also margins are high, but few intermediaries, and also it becomes prestigious to have that kind of a distribution rise. And then you also would like to have a high control, because it is company brand, company image becomes much more important, and the customers are well known, fewer customers, and then you always bother about innovations, loyalty, and also providing superior service or special service, and also goes with the high fashion, high society kind of a definition. As we were talking about, the question is how retailers compete. They compete in terms of the price, giving the best things possible. They also compete based on the service, these various choices which they can give it to their retailers and the customers, and also the kind of locational advantage what they have, easy access, parking, various things. And then we also have to see in terms of the selection. whether the brands are known, and also the other part of it is the kind of entertainment. So that means what additional things they can provide to the customer. So they make sure that the customer is always engaged. So as we see this retail distribution strategy, we need to see the intensity level, objective and product type, and then examples. So let me make a quick listing of these things. So when you see at the intensity level is very high, so achieve this mass market selling, and also we are talking about the product type in terms of the convenience goods. Examples are candy, the gum, the cigarettes, magazines, the soda, that is the whatever you are talking about, the Coke and things. When the intensity level is, we can see as a kind of a selective, that means we work with some selected intermediaries, and then we also have the shopping and the specialty goods. So examples could be these TVs, cameras, personal computers, things like that. And then when we see this exclusive kind of a thing, basically we work with few intermediaries as I mentioned earlier, and then shopping, specialty goods, and then industrial equipments. Then we are talking about examples as designer clothings. You can also talk about the aeroplanes and the helicopters, or it could be the mainframe computers. So these are like exclusive. So that means you have to work in a manner that you directly deal with the end customers. And then we can also think in terms of the non-store retailing. Today people are talking about selling electronic goods retailing, not necessarily you have it in any store. Then you can also talk about the vending machines. That means in a previous electronic retailing you can also do through web today. You also have the vending machines, so you go and buy coffee, but nobody is there. Put some coins and get your things. And also soon we will also see shops without any persons available. Then you also have the multi-level marketing, so the people directly sell on the roads or maybe in different places. Then we can also adopt door-to-door kind of a direct selling. So from wholesalers the direct selling could take place at the different points. And then you can also talk about the direct marketing. As a part of the non-store retailing is the telemarketing, or the telemarketing as you've seen in the TVs. So they exhibit the product, explain all the product usage, so that people can buy through ordering over phone. And also the direct mailing is possible. Then also the catalogs are sent, the books and other things can be sold like this through based on the catalogs. And then you also have the online marketing. The online is where you sell through the web, like the air tickets are sold through the web today. eBay kind of a thing can sell end-to-end product in there through their websites. So we are talking about today marketing not only through direct partners and the retailers, but also through various methods where you can basically we are talking about the non-store retailing. So online you will sell it, and then order goes to the manufacturer and directly supplied to the end customer. So we are now talking about clearly today the supply chain management. So the supply chain management is whatever we talked about earlier, the end-to-end re-engineering the processes so that the entire value chain from producers to consumers to simultaneously reduce inventories, reduce stock out, and line down the situations and keep the cost to the minimum. So we are talking about end-to-end management of the supply chain today. So we are talking about the foodstuffs, the suppliers, the storage, manufacturing facility, the warehouse, the wholesalers, to the retailers, to the consumer. So we need to see today it's a complete chain, and then every aspect of this need to be strengthened so that the consumer is at the advantage, and the issues which can come at each of these points are well understood, so that company benefits for all these through these efforts. So far in this lecture, what we have tried to do is to look at the concept and definitions of channel and channels of distribution, and the different distribution channels. The kind of consideration comes before the organization in channel planning, and finally the selecting the channels of distribution. And definitely in the next session we will move on to another important topic about the management and the society and the social responsibility and ethics.